Behind bars in the most feared prisons on Earth, real stories you can't forget. The night the lights went out. The screams came first. Deep inside one of the most feared prisons on Earth, a place swallowed by concrete, steel, and silence, every inmate suddenly froze. The lights flickered, then died completely. For 5 long seconds, the prison was nothing but darkness. You could hear metal doors shaking. You could hear boots running on the tiers above. And somewhere in that darkness, someone whispered, "Not again." A loud crash echoed through the cell blocks, followed by a shout from a guard. "All units move. Lockdowns now." Inmates pressed their faces against the bars, trying to understand what was happening. Some were terrified. Some were excited. And some had been waiting for this moment. No one inside that prison knew it yet, but what happened in that blackout would become one of the most unforgettable moments ever witnessed behind bars. And this is where our story begins. The prison that breaks men. This place wasn't just a prison. It was a world built to crush hope. Thick concrete walls. Gun towers on every corner. Barbed wire so sharp it could slice through gloves. Inmates said the air inside felt different, heavy, cold, almost like the building itself was watching you. Most prisoners were locked in 23 hours a day. 1 hour for a small yard surrounded by walls taller than a 2-story house. No sunlight hitting your skin. No real sky. Just a gray ceiling and a guard counting the time. Every morning started the same. A loud buzzer. A metal tray sliding through a slot. And a voice shouting, "Breakfast. Stand clear of the door." The food was plain and tasteless. Sometimes cold. Sometimes missing items. But complaining didn't matter. In here, you learned to accept whatever you were given. Inside the cells, prisoners found their own ways to survive. Some read old books. Some exercised until their bodies felt like they would break. Some carved tiny messages into the walls, just to feel human. But others were plotting. Watching everything. Waiting for a chance. And when the blackout hit that night, those men knew the moment they had been waiting for might finally be here. Because in the world's most feared prisons, silence is deadly. And darkness is even worse. The man everyone feared. When the lights went out, most inmates panicked. But one man didn't move at all. His name inside the prison was Reaper. Nobody knew his real name anymore. Some said he used to be a soldier. Others believed he once led one of the most dangerous prison gangs on the West Coast. But the truth didn't matter. What mattered was his reputation. Reaper didn't talk much. He didn't smile. He didn't ask for anything. But every inmate, young or old, tough or scared, stayed out of his way. Even the guards kept their voices steady when they approached his cell. Before the blackout, Reaper spent every day in the same routine. Push-ups until sweat covered the floor. Reading old newspapers he somehow collected. Staring through the bars like he could see beyond the walls. Most inmates were afraid of each other. Reaper was the only one who seemed afraid of nothing. And in a place built on fear, that made him powerful. The moment the darkness hit. As soon as the lights flashed and died, Reaper slowly stood up. Not rushed. Not scared. Like he expected it. From the cell next to him, a younger inmate named Javier called out, "Yo, Reaper, what's happening? A riot?" Reaper didn't answer. He stepped closer to the bars, listening, really listening, to everything happening around them. Footsteps. Metal clanging. Guards shouting orders. Inmates whispering. Then something strange happened. He smiled. Just a small, quick smile, but that alone sent chills through the whole tier. Because Reaper never smiled. Ever. A signal from the dark. Somewhere in the distance, deep inside the prison, a loud banging sound echoed. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm, almost like a code. Bang, 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 bang. 3 groups of hits. A message only a few inmates understood. Javier whispered, "Bro, that's not normal. That's the old signal, right?" Reaper finally spoke. His voice was low. "Someone's making a move." Javier swallowed hard. He didn't know if that was good news or the beginning of something deadly. Because in the world's most feared prisons, a move could mean anything. A planned attack. A breakout attempt. A gang war. Or something even worse. The blackout wasn't an accident. Someone caused it. And Reaper seemed to know exactly who. But before Javier could ask, another sound cut through the darkness. A sound the entire prison feared more than anything. The tear gas launchers unlocking. This meant the guards were preparing for chaos. And chaos inside a supermax? That could destroy everything. The blackout plan. The first tear gas round exploded 2 tiers above them. Poof. A cloud of smoke rolled across the walkway, and inmates started coughing and yelling. Boots pounded on the metal stairs as guards rushed in with shields and masks. But deep inside the darkness, Reaper stayed perfectly still. Javier covered his face with his shirt. Man, this is bad, real bad. Reaper didn't respond. He was replaying the banging signal in his head. Bang, 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 bang. 3 groups. A coded message that old-school inmates used long before cameras were everywhere. The message meant one thing. Power room hit. Someone had cut the electricity on purpose. And only a few people inside the prison had the kind of knowledge, or the courage, to pull that off. The Ghost Crew. Years ago, long before Javier arrived, there was a group of inmates known as the Ghost Crew. They weren't fighters. They weren't loud. They didn't run the yard. Instead, they were engineers, electricians, and former construction workers, men who knew how the prison was built. They used their knowledge to move silently, pass messages, and manipulate weak spots in the building without getting caught. Most people believed the crew had been split up or transferred long ago. But when the blackout hit, Reaper knew better. "They're still here," he muttered. Javier, still coughing, leaned against the wall. Who's still here?" Reaper stepped away from the bars. "Ghosts." And that one word made Javier freeze. The real danger. When a normal prison riot happens, people yell, fight, and break things. But this, the blackout, was different. It was quiet, organized, precise. That meant someone had a goal. Prisons don't fear fights. They fear plans. Because a plan means someone knows the weak points. Where the cameras are blind. Where the gates malfunction. What time the guards rotate. Where the emergency doors unlock during power loss. Javier whispered nervously, "What do they want? Freedom?" Reaper shook his head. "Not freedom." He pointed upward, toward the sound of guards struggling in the upper tiers. "Revenge." Javier felt his stomach twist. Revenge inside a place like this could mean anything. A hit on another inmate. A guard targeted. A gang message. Or a violent takeover of an entire block. But before Javier could ask another question, a loud mechanical click echoed through the cell block. One by one, metal doors began to unlock. Not all of them. Only certain ones. Only selected inmates. Someone was choosing who was about to be free. Reaper's eyes narrowed. He stepped back from the door. Because he already knew. His cell was on that list. And when the lockdown door slid open with a deep metal groan, Javier whispered the words everyone was thinking. "This is about to get crazy." The doors that should never open. The cell block shook as the heavy steel doors began unlocking one by one. Clink, clink. Echoes bounced off the concrete walls, mixing with the coughs and shouts from inmates still blinded by tear gas above. But down on Reaper's tier, everything felt slower, calmer, almost deliberate. Javier pressed himself against the wall. "Why is your door opening? What does this mean?" Reaper didn't answer immediately. He stepped toward the bars, watching as the red emergency lights flickered across the walkway. His door slid open. Reaper walked out with the calmness of someone stepping into their living room. This was not a surprise to him. This was expected. And that terrified Javier more than anything else tonight. The selected few. Other doors on the tier slid open too, but only a handful. Maybe 5 out of 40. Each man who stepped out had the same look. Focused. Silent. Prepared. These weren't random inmates. These were men with history. These were men with purpose. Javier whispered, trembling. "This is a setup, bro. This is something big." One of the newly freed inmates, a tall man with tattooed arms, nodded at Reaper as if greeting an old friend. "We're moving?" he asked quietly. Reaper gave a single nod. No loud talk. No arguments. Just silent understanding. Javier finally realized the truth. This wasn't chaos. This was a mission. The guards who didn't know. Above them, guards in riot gear moved through clouds of tear gas, coughing into their masks and shouting orders. They had no idea what was happening on Reaper's tier. They thought this was a random blackout. A small riot maybe. A technical failure. But down below, a group of hand-picked inmates were already moving with purpose, slipping into the shadows where the lights were weakest. Reaper turned back briefly. "Stay in your cell," he told Javier. His voice steady. Almost protective. "Whatever happens next, you don't want to be a part of it." Javier swallowed hard. "Reaper, what are you gonna do?" Reaper paused at the stairwell door. The shadows wrapped around him, making him look even larger, even darker. Then he said, "I'm finishing something that never should have started." With that, he disappeared into the darkness along with the others. The unseen corridor. Beyond the stairwell was an old service corridor, one that most inmates didn't even know existed. It hadn't been used in years. Dust-covered pipes lined the walls. Faded warning signs hung by rusted bolts. The air smelled like old water and metal, perfect for moving unseen. The men walked silently, their footsteps soft on the concrete floor. Reaper led the way. He knew exactly where he was going. And that's when the real truth began to reveal itself. This wasn't just about the blackout tonight. This was something years in the making. Something unfinished. Something dangerous. At the far end of the corridor, Reaper stopped at a locked steel door, the kind not even regular guards touched. The tall tattooed inmate asked quietly, "You think he's still there?" Reaper didn't blink. "Oh, he's there." He placed his hand on the cold metal door, eyes narrowed. "And tonight, it's time." The man behind the door. The steel door in front of them wasn't like the others in the prison. It was heavier, thicker, built to stay shut no matter what happened on the outside. The kind of door you only opened when you absolutely had to. Reaper placed his palm flat against it, breathing slowly. This was not the face of a man excited for freedom. This was the face of someone walking back into a nightmare he never fully escaped. The tattooed inmate whispered, "You sure about this? Once we open it, there's no going back." Reaper stared at the door. It was never supposed to stay closed. Then he nodded. And the ghost crew members got to work. The lock that shouldn't be openable. 2 inmates stepped forward. One carried a small piece of metal, sharpened from a broken bed frame. The other had a strip of metal wire twisted tight like a tool. In any other prison, nobody could get this close to a reinforced security door. But this blackout, this plan, gave them a window. A narrow one. One chance. They pushed the metal into the gap near the hinges, twisting it with force. Clink. A small latch inside popped loose. CDHD. Another latch slid aside. Reaper didn't say a word. He just listened, recognizing each sound. This wasn't their first time doing this. This door had been opened before. Years ago. And something behind it had changed Reaper forever. The past that returns. The door finally swung open with a long, deep groan. Inside was a narrow, dim hallway. The floor was stained with old watermarks. A single emergency bulb flickered overhead, barely lighting the space. But Javier, who had quietly stepped out of his cell and followed from afar, could now see a sign above the hallway. Restricted holding, high risk. His heart pounded. "Bro, what is this place?" He whispered even though he knew no one could hear him. This wasn't a normal unit. This looked like a part of the prison not meant for regular inmates. Or even regular guards. Reaper stepped inside first. The others followed. And at the end of that hallway was a final door. Smaller, older, but somehow even more dangerous. Reaper touched the rusted handle. Behind this door was a man he once trusted. A man who betrayed him in a way that changed everything inside this prison. A man responsible for a violent event long buried in reports, paperwork, and lies. A man Reaper had been waiting years to face again. The whisper from the dark. As Reaper began to turn the handle, a faint voice drifted from behind the door. Barely human. But clear. I knew you'd come back someday. Reaper froze. The tattooed inmate beside him took a step back. Javier, hiding behind the corner, felt every hair on his neck stand up. The voice continued. You've kept me waiting. Reaper slowly pushed the door inward. And there, sitting on the floor in a small, cold isolation cell, was a man with long gray hair, cuffed to the wall, staring with hollow, sunken eyes. A man Reaper once called brother. A man the prison had erased. Until tonight. Reaper stepped forward. His voice had no anger, no fear, just truth. It's time to finish what we started. The man smiled weakly. Then let's begin. The truth they buried. The cold isolation cell smelled like rust, damp concrete, and old secrets. The gray-haired man sat against the wall, his wrists chained high enough to force his back straight. Even after years in the dark, his eyes were sharp, too sharp. Javier, still peeking from the corner of the hallway, couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't a regular inmate. This man looked like someone the prison wanted forgotten forever. Reaper stepped closer. The other men stayed behind him, giving space, not out of fear, but respect. The gray-haired man lifted his head slowly. You're older, he said, voice rough. But you still walk like you expect to fight. Reaper didn't smile. And you still talk too much. The man smirked. Despite the chains. Despite the darkness. Despite being locked away for so long. He smirked. The real story. The tattooed inmate broke the silence. Reaper, we need to move. We don't have long before they cut power back on. Reaper didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the man in chains. The man who once knew every secret of this prison. The man everyone thought Reaper hated. But Javier noticed something different. This wasn't hate. This was unfinished business. The gray-haired man finally spoke clearly. Tell them the truth, brother. Javier's eyes widened. Brother? The other inmates froze. Reaper clenched his fists once, then relaxed them. He turned to the group. His voice was low, steady, controlled. Years ago, before any of you were here, there was a riot. The men nodded. Everyone had heard rumors. But the riot wasn't started by inmates. Now they stared. Reaper continued. It was staged. Javier's heart almost stopped. Reaper pointed toward the man in chains. We tried to expose what was happening in the medical unit. Guards stealing meds. Covering up injuries. Running their own little system. The gray-haired man whispered. They blamed us. Said we planned a breakout. Reaper nodded. They locked him away in here. Off the record. No trial. No hearing. The group exchanged shocked looks. This wasn't a revenge story. This was a cover-up. A big one. The missing piece. Javier whispered to himself. So the blackout, the ghost crew, this whole thing. The truth hit him like a wave. This wasn't an escape plan. This wasn't a gang mission. This was a rescue. Reaper looked at the man in chains and spoke softly. I told you I'd come back. I just needed the right chance. The gray-haired man lowered his head. They'll come for all of you when they find out what door you opened. Reaper nodded. I know. The tattooed inmate stepped forward. Then what's the move? We taking him out with us? Reaper shook his head. Not yet. There's something else we need. He knelt and lifted a small metal box hidden behind an old water pipe, so dusty and forgotten that it blended into the wall. Javier gasped quietly. They'd hidden it here years ago. Reaper opened the box. Inside were papers, photographs, and a tiny flash drive, evidence. Evidence the prison buried. Evidence someone was willing to shut down an entire cell block to retrieve. The gray-haired man whispered. That's why they locked me up. That's why they erased me. Reaper closed the box. Not anymore. The sound of boots. Then, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Armored. Focused. The guards had found the breach. The tattooed inmate whispered. They're coming. Javier ducked deeper into the shadows. Reaper stood tall. He looked at his brother, still chained, and said, I'll be back when the time is right. The gray-haired man nodded. Finish it. Reaper motioned to the others. Move. Now. The men slipped back into the corridor just as flashlights and riot shields appeared in the distance. Shouts filled the hallway. Guards barking orders. Boots pounding. Metal clashing. And deep inside the darkness, the man in chains closed his eyes. Because for the first time in years, someone had finally come for him. The chase in the dark. The moment Reaper and the others slipped back into the service corridor, the building erupted with noise. Flashlights cut through the darkness like sharp blades. Radios crackled with urgent voices. Boots thundered toward them. Javier stayed hidden in the shadows, barely breathing. Reaper didn't run, he moved. Fast, silent, controlled. The others followed, sticking close behind like they'd trained for this moment. And maybe they had. The tattooed inmate whispered. Left route or yard tunnel? Reaper didn't hesitate. Left. The tunnel leads to sensors. They'll trap us. They sprinted down the long, narrow corridor. Pipes rattled overhead. Cold water dripped from the ceiling. Their footsteps echoed softly, too softly to give away their direction. Behind them, guards shouted. We have movement in the lower corridor. Block the exits. Reaper kept going. The evidence box was tucked tight under his arm. The only proof that the prison had buried the truth. Proof someone was willing to die for. The falling pipe. Suddenly, crank. A rusted pipe above snapped loose and crashed down right in front of the group, splashing dirty water everywhere. The tall inmate jumped back. We're blocked. Reaper scanned the area quickly. His eyes locked on a narrow gap between two pipes, barely wide enough for a person to fit through. Squeeze through, he ordered. One at a time. The others didn't question him. They went. But as they crawled into the tight space, a beam of light swept across the far end of the corridor. A guard shouted, I see them. On the ground. Javier froze, heart slamming into his ribs. Reaper stayed calm. Move faster, he whispered. They pushed through the narrow gap just as flashbang canisters rolled toward the pipe blockage. Boom-flash. White light flooded the corridor. Dust and metal shook. The guards advanced. Reaper barely slipped through the gap before another flashbang exploded behind him. On the other side, the men gasped for air in a small, forgotten maintenance room. But they weren't safe. Not even close. The control panel. Reaper placed the metal evidence box on a workbench. He wiped dust off an old electrical panel mounted on the wall. The tattooed inmate frowned. Why here? We can't get out through this room. Reaper didn't answer. He studied the panel, memorizing every wire, every switch. Javier, who had followed quietly and hidden behind some pipes, watched in disbelief. Reaper flipped a breaker. Then another. Then he pulled down a large red switch labeled, Secondary Grid Override. The lights flickered. The guards' shouts outside changed from confident to confused. Radios buzzed. Control. We're losing cameras on Block D. Backup system isn't responding. Whoever's in there knows what they're doing. Lock everything down. Javier whispered. Bro, he's shutting the whole system down again? Reaper didn't turn. No. He flipped the final switch. I'm buying us 5 minutes. The code only a few knew. The tall inmate asked. 5 minutes for what? Reaper pulled a small metal panel from the wall, revealing an even older device. Something most guards had forgotten existed. A manual gate release system. Mechanical. Hidden. Not connected to the main grid. Only old-school inmates and veteran guards even knew about it. Reaper twisted the lever. Far away in the prison's lower levels, a deep metallic thud echoed. There, Reaper said. A tunnel gate they don't know is open. The tattooed man's eyes widened. You found an escape route? Reaper finally turned to face them. No. His voice was firm. We're not escaping. Silence. Everyone stared at him. He lifted the evidence box. We're delivering this. And once it leaves the building, they can't hide it anymore. Javier's breath hitched. This wasn't about freedom. This was about truth. The final warning. Boots pounded on the other side of the wall. Guards were seconds away from breaching the room. Reaper turned to the men. Once they break in, split up. Go through the tunnel. Deliver the box to the drop point. The tall inmate shook his head. What about you? Reaper closed the panel. He didn't hide anything now. They'll never let me walk away. Javier felt ice crawl through his stomach. No. No, Reaper, don't say that. Reaper looked calm, focused, ready. This isn't my escape. He handed the evidence box to the tattooed inmate. It's my return. The door behind them shook as guards slammed into it. The Reaper stepped toward the door. Not to run. To stop them. To give the evidence a chance to escape the prison he never could. The sacrifice. The steel door buckled under the weight of riot shields slamming into it. The dust rained from the ceiling. The men inside knew they were seconds away from a full breach. Reaper stood in front of the door, shoulders squared, fists clenched. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He was choosing his ground. Behind him, the others hesitated. They didn't want to leave him. But they also understood something important. If the evidence didn't get out, everything tonight, the blackout, the risks, the years of planning, would mean nothing. The tattooed inmate, gripping the box, stepped closer. Reaper, let us fight with you. Reaper shook his head slowly. If you stay, we lose everything. The tall man looked down, jaw trembling. But you're... Reaper cut him off. His voice low. I was never getting out of this place. Silence fell. Even Javier, watching from the shadows, felt his chest tighten. Reaper continued. But he deserves a chance. The truth deserves a chance. He meant the gray-haired man in the isolation cell. He meant the men who were framed. He meant every inmate who had been silenced. And himself. The tunnel of last hope. The tattooed inmate finally nodded. He turned toward the hidden manual gate Reaper had opened. A narrow tunnel lay beyond it, old, cracked, and barely lit. It ran under the prison, past forgotten storage rooms, eventually leading to a maintenance exit near the exterior wall. A place the guards almost never checked because no one even remembered it existed. Reaper spoke again. Stick to the left path. The right side has loose flooring. Step wrong and you'll drop into the drainage pit. The tall man frowned. How do you know all this? Reaper didn't answer. He didn't need to. His whole life had been inside these walls. He knew every hidden corner. A final goodbye. As the men climbed into the tunnel, the tattooed inmate looked back one last time. We'll come back for you. Reaper shook his head. Don't. His voice softened, unusually gentle. Just get it out. That's all that matters. The men disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. All except Javier. He stayed frozen, torn between fear and guilt. He hadn't been chosen. He hadn't been part of the plan. He wasn't even supposed to be here. But he couldn't leave. Something inside him wouldn't allow it. The door breaks. Bang. A metal hinge snapped. Reaper braced himself. Javier whispered, Reaper, but please, come with us. Reaper turned, finally seeing Javier hiding near the pipe. He didn't look surprised. He just gave a small nod, almost like approval. You did good staying out of sight. Javier shook his head. I don't want you to die. Reaper stepped closer, placing one hand on Javier's shoulder, the first time he had ever touched him. Listen carefully. Javier held his breath. Reaper whispered, survival isn't always about running. Sometimes it's about choosing what's worth dying for. Javier's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. Then let me stay too. Reaper shook his head. His voice dropped to a whisper. The world needs someone who saw this with their own eyes. Someone who can tell the truth if everything goes wrong. He nudged Javier toward the tunnel. Go. Javier hesitated, but then he turned and vanished into the darkness just as... Crash. The door exploded inward. Shields. Mats. Batons. Shouts. Reaper exhaled once. Come, steady, accepting. Then stepped forward into the blinding light. The first strike. A guard yelled. On the ground. Reaper didn't move. Another shouted. Get down now. Still nothing. Reaper raised his empty hands, slowly, making it clear he wasn't fighting back. But the guards didn't come to negotiate. They came to end this. The first baton swung. Reaper didn't flinch. The price of truth. The first baton strike hit Reaper's shoulder with a sickening crack. Pain shot through his arm, but he didn't fall. He stood firm, silent, grounded, unbroken. A second guard rushed in from the side. Then a third. Shields slammed him backward. Batons rained down in fast, sharp blows. The metal floor echoed with every strike. But Reaper didn't fight back. Not once. Not because he was weak. Not because he was scared. But because he had already chosen. The evidence had to make it out. He had to buy time. He had to be the wall that stopped the system long enough for the truth to escape. A guard shouted, "Stop resisting." But Reaper wasn't resisting. He was sacrificing. The radio call. One of the guards pressed a radio to his shoulder. "Control, we've got him. Suspect down, Sector 7 Maintenance Hall." Another guard stepped closer. "Where are the others? Who helped you?" Reaper didn't answer. A stun baton pressed against his back. "Talk." Still nothing. Reaper's silence wasn't stubbornness, it was protection. Javier, crawling through the tunnel with the others, heard the muffled shouts echoing through the walls. He clenched his fists and forced himself not to turn back. He knew Reaper wasn't buying time for himself. He was buying it for them. Inside the tunnel. The tunnel was darker than night. Narrow. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow, steady taps. The tattooed inmate carried the evidence box tight against his chest. Javier followed close behind, shaking, breathing hard. The tall man whispered, "You okay, kid?" Javier nodded, though he wasn't okay at all. His voice cracked. Is Reaper really gonna survive that? No one answered. The silence told him what he didn't want to hear. But they kept moving. Because stopping now meant Reaper's sacrifice would be pointless. The breach team arrives. Back in the maintenance room, more guards stormed in. They moved over Reaper like a flood of armor and boots. Someone strapped restraints on his wrists. Another searched him roughly. A lieutenant stepped forward. Older. Hard face. Eyes that had seen too much. He crouched down. "You again?" Reaper stared up, breathing slowly through the pain. The lieutenant continued. "All these years, you still think you can expose us?" Reaper's jaw tightened. The lieutenant leaned closer. "He's never getting out. You know that." Reaper finally spoke. His voice low, steady, dangerous. "You locked away an innocent man." The lieutenant smiled. "Prisons aren't made for innocents." Then he stood. "Get him up." Two guards hauled Reaper to his feet. Blood dripped down his forehead. His lip was split. His shoulder hung wrong. But he still looked unbroken. Even now. Even here. The final message. As they dragged him toward the hallway, Reaper lifted his head one last time. He looked straight at the lieutenant. Then he said something so quiet only the closest guards heard it. "You should have finished the job years ago." The lieutenant stiffened. "What did you say?" Reaper's eyes stayed calm. "Because tonight, your lies left this room." The lieutenant's face drained of color. He spun around. "Find the others. Now." Guards scrambled in every direction. But Reaper didn't look scared. He looked satisfied. Because the truth was no longer inside the room. It was out there. Moving through the tunnels. Getting closer to daylight. The outside world. Javier and the others reached the final section of the tunnel. A rusted hatch that led to a forgotten maintenance shed just outside the outer wall. The tattooed inmate pushed the hatch gently. It opened with a soft creak. Cool night air rushed in. Freedom was inches away. Javier whispered, "We made it." The tall man placed a heavy hand on Javier's shoulder. "Kid, now we do our part." They climbed out into the night. The maintenance shed was empty. Silent. But beyond it, far in the distance, you could hear sirens beginning to wail. The prison had discovered the breach. And they were coming fast. The tattooed inmate tightened his grip on the evidence box. He looked at the group. Then nodded. "Let's finish what Reaper started." They sprinted into the shadows. Not running away from danger, but running toward the truth. The world beyond the walls. Cold night air hit Javier's face like a slap. Sharp, real, terrifying. For the first time since the blackout began, he realized he wasn't just part of an inmate panic. He was part of something bigger, something dangerous, something historic. The tattooed inmate held the evidence box like it was a newborn child, tight, protected, close to his chest. The tall man scanned the dark field around them. The prison yard lights were still down, flickering in and out. The alarms screamed through the air. Searchlights whipped across the sky, trying to find anything moving. They had seconds, maybe minutes. No more. The shadow path. Javier whispered. Which way? They'll see us if we run in the open. The tattooed man pointed toward a long line of old equipment trucks parked near the far fence. We move through the shadow side. Stay low. They crouched and sprinted from one dark spot to another, hiding behind dumpsters, old tractors, forgotten metal containers. Every time a searchlight swept across the field, they froze. Javier's heart hammered so loud he worried the guards could hear it. But the tattooed man was laser-focused. He'd done this sort of thing before, not escaping prison, but moving like a ghost when needed. That knowledge was keeping them alive. The final fence. At the far end of the maintenance yard stood a smaller, older fence. Rusted, damaged, barely held together. Nothing like the main security barriers. The tall inmate grabbed the wire and lifted. It bent upward, just enough for a person to slide under. Javier went through first, belly scraping dirt and gravel. The others followed quickly. Finally, the tattooed inmate slid the evidence box under the opening before crossing himself. Behind them, spotlights suddenly turned. Voices echoed. Movement. We see movement near the maintenance shed. Javier's stomach flipped. They broke into a run. The woods. A thick line of trees set just outside the prison's forgotten service road. Perfect for hiding or getting lost. They didn't slow down. Branches slapped their faces. Roots tried to trip them. But they kept running until the prison walls were hidden behind the trees. The tattooed inmate finally stopped. Chest heaving. Sweat dripping. But eyes alert. He held up the box. This is it. Reaper's whole life depends on what we do next. Javier wiped dirt from his cheek. Where do we take it? The tall man answered this time. To the drop point he planned. There's someone waiting, someone on the outside he trusted. Javier frowned. Who? The tall man shook his head. He never said. But he kept repeating the same thing. Get it out and someone will know what to do. Javier swallowed hard. It sounded like faith. Wild, dangerous faith. But at this point, what else did they have? Back inside the prison. As they moved deeper into the woods, chaos exploded inside the facility. Guards on radios yelled over each other. Sector 12 breach confirmed. We lost the suspects. How did they get past the outer yard? Inside a cold hallway, the lieutenant stood inches away from Reaper, who knelt on the floor with restraints biting into his wrists. The lieutenant's voice was low, angry, shaking. Where are they going? Who has the evidence? Reaper lifted his swollen eyes and managed a small, exhausted smirk. You'll find out. The lieutenant grabbed him by the collar. Tell me right now. Reaper's voice stayed calm. If you were smart. He leaned closer. You'd be scared. The lieutenant froze. Because something in Reaper's voice wasn't a threat. It was a fact. The long walk. In the woods, the men followed an old animal trail until they reached a narrow dirt road. Javier whispered, How much farther? The tall man checked the stars through the tree canopy. Another mile. Javier's legs burned. His lungs stung. But he kept moving. Reaper's words echoed in his mind. The world needs someone who saw this with their own eyes. He didn't understand it then. He understood it now. The waiting vehicle. As they reached the end of the dirt road, they saw it. A car. Parked under the trees. Engine off. Lights out. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat. The tattooed inmate tightened his grip on the box. That must be the contact. But as they approached, the driver stepped out slowly, and Javier felt the world tilt. The driver wasn't an ordinary person. They wore a badge under their jacket. A law enforcement badge. But not from the prison. Not from local police. Something else. Something bigger. The tattooed inmate whispered. No way. The driver raised a hand. Not threatening. Just signaling silence. Give me the box. We've been waiting years for this. Javier's mouth went dry. This was bigger than Reaper. Bigger than the inmates. Bigger than the blackout. This was a case. A real case. One that someone in power wanted buried. But now, it was out. The handoff. The tattooed inmate stepped forward slowly. Hands shaking. Heart pounding. He placed the evidence box into the driver's hands. The driver nodded once. You did the right thing. All of you. Then they looked directly at Javier. Especially you. Javier didn't know what to say. None of them did. The driver opened the trunk. The box disappeared inside. The trunk shut. The car engine rumbled to life. Before leaving, the driver said one final thing. This ends tonight. Then the car sped off into the darkness. The men stood in silence. Javier whispered, "What now?" The tall man answered quietly, "Now, we survive long enough to see what happens." Back inside the prison, Reaper was dragged down the hallway. Bruised. Bleeding. Barely standing. But smiling. Because he knew. The truth had finally escaped the walls. The prison that woke up. Inside the prison, everything was spiraling. Officers sprinted through hallways. Alarm lights flashed red across every tier. Doors slammed. Locks engaged. Orders echoed from every direction. But beneath all that noise, there was fear. Real fear. Because the higher-ups knew what the escaping men carried. Not weapons. Not contraband. Evidence. Evidence that could destroy careers. Expose secrets. Rewrite years of reports and investigations. And the one man they wanted to silence, Reaper, was now sitting in restraints with a quiet smile on his face. That terrified them more than anything else tonight. The lieutenant's panic. The lieutenant stormed into the control room, slamming his fist on the console. "Find them. I don't care what it takes. Find them now." A younger guard hesitated. "Sir, the outer cameras glitched during the blackout. We're still rebooting." "Then check manual patrol videos," the lieutenant barked. Another guard nervously swallowed. "Sir, there's something you need to see." He handed the lieutenant a tablet. A paused video frame showed the maintenance yard. But the tunnel hatch was already open. The lieutenant zoomed in. His face went pale. "That hatch is sealed. How did they find it?" The guard hesitated. "Sir, it looks like someone opened it from the inside. Someone who knew the old layout." The lieutenant glared toward the hallway where Reaper had been taken. He planned this. But the truth was worse. Reaper hadn't planned it alone. Someone on the outside had waited for this moment too. The interrogation room. Two guards dragged Reaper into a small concrete room. A metal chair sat in the center. A single buzzing light bulb burned overhead. They forced him into the chair and chained his wrists down. Reaper didn't resist. The lieutenant stepped inside. He closed the door behind him. Slowly. Deliberately. "You think you've won?" he asked. Reaper stayed silent. Blood dripped down his face. His knuckles were swollen. His shirt torn. But his eyes were calm. Too calm. The lieutenant leaned in. "We'll catch your friends. We'll find the box. And when we do..." He paused inches from Reaper's face. "You'll wish you stayed in that maintenance room." Reaper lifted his eyes slowly. His voice soft but sharp. "You won't find them." The lieutenant clenched his jaw. "You forget where you are. We control everything inside this place." Reaper shook his head. "Not anymore." The call that changed everything. A guard burst into the room without knocking. Sweating. Panicked. Sir, you need to come to the office right now. It's urgent." The lieutenant snapped. "I said no interruptions." The guard cut him off. Something no guard ever did. "Sir, the warden is on the phone. He said it's federal." The lieutenant froze. "Federal?" He stormed out of the room, leaving Reaper tied to the chair. Reaper lowered his head and smiled. He knew exactly what that meant. Someone important. Someone powerful. Someone outside the prison had just received the evidence. And they weren't wasting any time. Outside, the hand that moves the system. Down the forest road, the car with the evidence box reached a checkpoint. Two black SUVs waited there. Not police. Not prison officials. Federal agents. The driver stepped out with the box. An agent approached. Is that everything? The driver nodded. Years of cover-ups. Medical reports. Photos. Logs. And a full statement from the man they buried. The agent exhaled slowly. Good. We've been trying to get this for years. The driver pointed back toward the prison. What about the inmate who exposed it? The agent's face darkened. If he's still alive, we'll get him out. Back inside, the silence before the storm. Reaper sat alone in the concrete room. No guards. No noise. Just the hum of the single light bulb overhead. His breathing was heavy. Pain crawled through his ribs. His shoulder throbbed. But he didn't break. He never did. Suddenly, the intercom crackled. A voice came through. All units, stand by. We have federal inspectors en route to the facility. Repeat, federal inspectors inbound. Reaper closed his eyes. The truth had reached the right hands. The storm was coming. And this time, it wasn't coming for the inmates. The truth that escaped the walls. The night ended with sirens, flashing lights, barking orders, and fear spreading through a prison that once believed it controlled everything. But something had changed. Something no lockdown, no guard, no lieutenant could undo. The truth had finally escaped. The outside world moves. Before sunrise, federal vehicles rolled into the facility. Agents walked through the gates with files, warrants, and authority the prison couldn't challenge. They weren't here for the inmates. They were here for the system. Inside the prison walls, cameras were pulled, evidence rooms were sealed, and officers were ordered to stand down. Reports that had been buried for years were finally opened. Investigators interviewed guards one by one. Names were written down. Lies began to crack. The walls of silence, the ones stronger than concrete, finally broke. Reaper's final moment. In the dim interrogation room, Reaper sat chained to the chair, bruised, beaten, but still upright. The door opened. A federal agent stepped inside. She looked at him with calm, steady eyes. You're Reaper. He nodded lightly. She placed a folder on the table, the very folder holding the evidence box contents. You're the reason we're here. Reaper didn't respond. He just stared at the folder. The agent leaned closer. You saved a man who never should have been locked away. You exposed officers who abused their power. You risked everything to make sure the truth reached us. Reaper exhaled softly. I just finished what they tried to hide. The agent paused, then said the words no one inside that prison ever expected to hear. You're being transferred. Effective immediately. Reaper lifted his head. For the first time in years. Hope flickered in his eyes. Not freedom. Not a miracle. But justice. Real justice. The men who ran in the dark. In the woods, Javier and the others watched the distant glow of vehicles moving across the prison. They didn't know exactly what was happening inside. But they knew one thing. Reaper didn't sacrifice himself for nothing. The tall man placed a hand on Javier's shoulder. Kid, whatever happens next, remember this night. Javier nodded, swallowing hard. I will. Because he understood now. Some fights aren't about breaking out. They're about breaking the truth free. The prison that couldn't hide anymore. By the next afternoon, news helicopters circled above the facility. Reporters gathered outside the gates. Families demanded answers. But the biggest shock was this. The gray-haired man, the one buried in isolation, was removed from his hidden cell and placed under federal protection. A man forgotten by the system had finally been seen. And the prison that once feared nothing, now feared the truth. Final message to the viewer. In places built to hold people down, darkness often wins. But sometimes, just sometimes, a single act of courage can crack the strongest wall. Tonight, inside one of the most feared prisons on Earth, courage didn't look like a superhero. It looked like a man in chains refusing to stay silent. It looked like inmates risking everything to reveal a buried truth. It looked like justice taking its first step into a place designed to keep it out. Because in the end, prisons can hold bodies, but they can never fully cage the truth. And the story you just witnessed? This is only the beginning. more walls will crack. More secrets will rise. More voices will be heard, even behind bars. Even in the darkest places on earth, truth always finds a way out.